Chapter 52. The second state of man after death. The second state of man after death is called the state of his interiors, because he is then let into the interiors of his mind, that is, of his will and thought, while his exteriors, which he had been in during the first state, are laid asleep. Whoever gives any thought to man's life and speech and action can know that everyone has exteriors and interiors, that is, exterior and interior thoughts and intentions. This he can know from these things. In civil life, one thinks about others in accordance with what he has heard and learned of them by report or conversation. But he does not talk with them in accordance with his thought. And if they are evil, he nevertheless treats them with civility. That this is so is known especially in the case of pretenders and flatterers, who speak and act in one way, and think and will in a wholly different way. Also in the case of hypocrites, who talk about God and heaven and the salvation of souls and the truths of the church and their country's good and their neighbour, as if from faith and love, although in heart they believe otherwise and love themselves alone. From these things it can be established that there are two kinds of thought, one exterior and the other interior, and that there are those who speak from exterior thought, while from their interior thought they have other sentiments, and that those two kinds of thought are kept separate, since the interior is carefully prevented from flowing into the exterior and becoming manifest in any way. By creation, man is so formed as to have his interior and exterior thought make one by correspondence. And these make one in those who are in good. For such both think and speak what is good only. But in those who are in evil, interior and exterior thought do not make one, for such think what is evil and say what is good. With such there is an inversion of order. For good with them is on the outside and evil within. And in consequence evil has dominion over good, and subjects it to itself as a servant, that it may serve it as a means for gaining its ends, which are of the same nature as their love. Because there is such an end in the good that they seek and do, it is evident that good with them is not good, but is infected with evil, however good it may appear in external form to those not acquainted with their interiors. It is otherwise with those who are in good. With such, order is not inverted, but good from interior thought flows into exterior thought, and thus into speech and act. This is the order into which man was created. For in heaven and in the light of heaven, such are the interiors of those there. And as the light of heaven is the divine truth that goes forth from the Lord, and consequently is the Lord in heaven, therefore such are led by the Lord. All these things have been said to make known that every man has interior thought and exterior thought, and that these are distinct from each other. When thought is mentioned, will also is understood, for thought is from the will, and no one can think apart from the will. All this makes clear what is meant by the state of man's exteriors and the state of his interiors. When will and thought are mentioned, then by will is also meant affection and love, and all the delight and pleasure that spring from affection and love, since all these relate to the will as to their subject. For what a man wills, he loves, and feels to be delightful or pleasurable. And on the other hand, what a man loves and feels to be delightful or pleasurable, that he wills. But by thought is then meant everything by which he confirms his affection or love. For thought is simply the will's form, or that whereby what is willed may appear in light. This form is made apparent through various rational analyses, which have their origin in the spiritual world and belong properly to the spirit of man. It is to be known that man is wholly such as his interiors are, and not such as his exteriors are, separate from his interiors. This is because his interiors belong to his spirit, and the life of his spirit is the life of man, for from it his body lives. And because of this, such as a man is as to his interiors, such he continues to be to eternity. But as the exteriors pertain to the body, they are separated after death, and those of them that adhere to the spirit are laid asleep, and serve purely as a plane for the interiors, as has been shown above in treating of the memory of man which continues after death. This makes clear what is man's own and what is not his own, namely that with the evil nothing belonging to the exterior thought from which they speak, or to the exterior will from which they act, is their own, but only that belonging to their interior thought and will. When the first state, which is the state of the exteriors, treated of in the preceding section, has been passed through, the man-spirit is let into the state of his interiors, or into the state of his interior will and the thought therefrom, in which he had been in the world when left to himself to think freely and without restraint. Into this state he unconsciously glides, just as when in the world he withdraws the thought nearest to his speech, that is, from which he speaks, towards his interior thought and abides in the latter. Therefore, in this state of his interiors, the man-spirit is in himself and in his very life. For to think freely from his own affection is the very life of man, and is himself. In this state, the spirit thinks from his very will, thus from his very affection, or from his very love. And the thought then makes one with the will, and one in such a manner that he seems scarcely to think, but only to will. It is nearly the same when he speaks, yet with the difference that he speaks with a kind of fear that the thoughts of the will may go forth naked, since from a civil life in the world this has come to be part of his will. All men, without exception, are let into this state after death, because it is their spirit's own state. The former state is such as the man was in regard to his spirit when in company, and that is not his own state. That this state, namely the state of the exteriors into which man first comes after death, as shown in the preceding section, is not his own state, can be confirmed by many things, For example, that spirits not only think, but also speak from their affection, since their speech is from their affection, as can be confirmed from the things said and shown in the section on the speech of angels. It was in this way that man had thought while in the world, when he was thinking within himself. For at such times his thought was not from the speech of his body, but he saw the things, and in a minute of time saw more than he could afterwards utter in half an hour. Again, that the state of the exteriors is not man's own state, or the state of his spirit, is evident from the fact that when he is in the company in the world, he then speaks in accord with the laws of moral and civil life. And at such times interior thought rules the exterior thought as one person rules another, to keep him from transgressing the limits of what is seemly and honourable. It is evident also from the fact that when a man thinks within himself, he thinks how he must speak and act in order to please and to secure friendship, goodwill, and favour, and this in extraneous ways, that is, otherwise than he would do if he acted in accordance with his own will. From these things it is clear that the state of the interiors into which the spirit is let is his own state, and was his own state when he was living in the world as a man. When the spirit is in the state of his interiors, it becomes clearly evident what the man was in himself when he was in the world, for at such times he acts from his proprium. He who was in the world interiorly in good then acts rationally and wisely, and even more wisely than in the world, because he is released from the connection with the body, and thus from those earthly things that caused obscurity and interposed, as it were, a cloud. But he who was in evil in the world then acts foolishly and insanely, and even more insanely than in the world, because he is free and under no restraint. For while he lived in the world, he was sane in externals, since by means of externals he made himself appear to be a rational man. But when he has been stripped of his externals, his insanities are revealed. An evil man who in externals takes on the semblance of a good man may be likened to a vessel, shining and polished on the outside and covered with a lid, within which filth of all kinds is hidden, in accordance with the Lord's saying, "Ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which outwardly appear beautiful, but inwardly are full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness." All who have lived a good life in the world, and have acted from conscience, who are such as have acknowledged the divine, and have loved divine truths, especially such as have applied those truths to life, seem to themselves, when let into the state of their interiors, like those aroused from sleep into full wakefulness, or like people passing from darkness into light. They then think from the light of heaven, thus from an interior wisdom, and they act from good, thus from an interior affection. Heaven even flows into their thoughts and affections with an interior blessedness and delight of which they had previously had no knowledge, for they have communication with the angels of heaven. They then acknowledge the Lord and worship him from their very life, for being in the state of their interiors, they are in their own life, as has been said just above. And as freedom pertains to interior affection, they then acknowledge and worship the Lord from freedom. Thus, too, they withdraw from external sanctity and come into that internal sanctity in which worship itself truly consists. Such is the state of those who have lived a Christian life in accordance with the commandments in the Word. But the state of those who have lived an evil life in the world, and who have had no conscience, and have in consequence denied the divine, is the direct opposite of this. For all who live an evil life inwardly in themselves deny the divine, however much they may suppose, when in external thought, that they acknowledge the Lord and do not deny him. For acknowledging the Lord and living an evil life are opposites. When such in the other life come into the state of their interiors, and are heard speaking and seen acting, they appear foolish. For from their evil lusts they burst forth into all sorts of abominations, into contempt of others, ridicule and blasphemy, hatred and revenge. They plot intrigues, some with a cunning and malice that can scarcely be believed to be possible in any man. For they are then in a state of freedom to act in harmony with the thoughts of their will, since they are separated from the exterior things that restrained and checked them in the world. In a word, they are deprived of their rationality, because while they were in the world, what is rational did not have its seat in their interiors, but in their exteriors. And yet they seemed to themselves to be wiser than others. This being their character, while in the second state they are let down for short intervals into the state of their exteriors, and into a recollection of their actions when they were in the state of their interiors. Some of them then feel ashamed and acknowledge that they have been insane. Some do not feel ashamed, and some are angry because they are not permitted to remain permanently in the state of their exteriors. But these are shown what they would be if they were to continue in that state, namely that they would attempt to accomplish in secret ways the same evil ends, and by semblances of goodness, honesty and justice would mislead the simple in heart and faith, and would utterly destroy themselves. For their exteriors would at length burn with the same fire as their interiors, and this would consume their whole life. When in this state, spirits become visibly just what they had been in themselves while in the world. What they then did and said secretly being now made manifest. For now, because external things do not restrain them, they speak such things openly, and also try to do them, not being fearful for their reputation as in the world. They are also brought into many states of their evils, that what they are may be evident to angels and good spirits. Thus are hidden things laid open, and secret things uncovered, in accordance with the Lord's words. There is nothing covered up that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. Whatsoever ye have said in the darkness shall be heard in the light, and what ye have spoken in the ear in the inner chambers shall be proclaimed on the housetops. And elsewhere, I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. The quality of the wicked in this state cannot be described in a few words, for each one is insane in accord with his own lusts, and these are various. Therefore, I would merely mention some special instances from which conclusions may be formed respecting the rest. Those who have loved themselves above all things, and in their occupations and employments have looked to their own honour, and have performed uses and found delight in them, not for the use's sake, but for the sake of reputation, that they might, because of them, be esteemed more worthy than others, and have thus been fascinated by their reputation for honour, are more stupid in this second state than others. For so far as one loves himself, to that extent he is separated from heaven. And so far as he is separated from heaven, he is separated from wisdom. But those who have not only been in self-love, but have been crafty also, and have raised themselves to honours by means of crafty practices, associate themselves with the worst of spirits and learn magic arts, which are abuses of divine order. And by means of these they assail and infest all who do not honour them, laying snares, fomenting hatred, burning with revenge, and are eager to vent their rage on all who do not yield to them. And they rush into all these enormities so far as their fiendish companions favour them. And at length they meditate upon how they can climb up into heaven to destroy it, or be worshipped there as gods. To such length does their madness carry them. Papists of this character are more insane than the rest, for they cherish the notion that heaven and hell are subject to their power, and that they can remit sins at pleasure, claiming to themselves all that is divine, and calling themselves Christ. This persuasion is such with them that wherever it flows in, it disturbs the mind and induces darkness, even to pain. Such are nearly the same in both the first and the second state, but in the second they are without rationality. Of their insanities and their lot after this state, some particulars will be stated in the little work on the Last Judgment and the destruction of Babylon. Those who have attributed creation to nature, and have therefore in heart, if not with the lips, denied the divine, and thus all things of the church and of heaven associate with their like in this second state, and call everyone God who excels in craftiness, worshipping him even with divine honours. I have seen such in an assembly adoring a magician, debating about nature and behaving like fools, as if they were beasts under a human form, while among them there were some who in the world had been in stations of dignity, and some who had been esteemed learned and wise. So with others in other states. From these few instances it can be inferred what those are who have the interiors of their minds closed heavenwards, as is the case with all who have received no influx out of heaven through acknowledgement of the divine and a life of faith. Everyone can judge from himself how he would act if, being such, he were left free to act with no fear of the law and no fear in regard to his life, and with no outward restraints, such as fear of injury to one's reputation, or of loss of honour and gain and consequent pleasures. Nevertheless, the insanity of such is restrained by the Lord, that it may not rush beyond the limits of use. For even by every one of such spirits a use is performed. In them, good spirits see what evil is and its quality, and what man is when he is not led by the Lord. Another of their uses is their collecting together evil spirits like themselves and separating them from the good. And another, that the truths and goods that the evil had outwardly professed and feigned are taken away from them, and they are brought into the evils of their own life and the falsities of their evil, and are thus prepared for hell. For no one comes into hell until he is in his own evil and the falsities of evil, since no one is permitted there to have a divided mind, that is, to think and speak one thing and to will another. Every evil spirit there will think what is false from evil, and will speak from the falsity of evil, in both respects from the will, thus from his own essential love and its delight and pleasure, in the same way that he thought while in the world when he was in his spirit. That is, in the same way as he thought in himself when he thought from interior affection. The reason is that the will is the man himself, and not the thought, except so far as it partakes of the will. The will being the very nature itself, or disposition, of the man. Therefore, man's being let into his will is being let into his nature or disposition, and likewise into his own life. For by his life man puts on a nature, and after death he continues to be such as the nature is that he has acquired by his life in the world. And with the evil, this nature can no longer be amended and changed by way of the thought or by the understanding of truth. When evil spirits are in this second state, as they rush into evils of every kind, they are subjected to frequent and grievous punishments. In the world of spirits, there are many kinds of punishment, and there is no regard for person, whether one had been in the world a king or a servant. Every evil carries its punishment with it, the evil and the punishment being connected. Therefore, whoever is in evil is also in the punishment of evil. And yet no one in the other world suffers punishment on account of the evils that he had done in the world, but only on account of the evils that he then does. Although it amounts to the same, and is the same thing whether it be said that they suffer punishment on account of their evils in the world, or that they suffer punishment on account of the evils they do in the other life. Since everyone after death returns into his own life, and thus into like evils. And the man continues the same as he had been in the life of the body. They are punished because the fear of punishment is the sole means of subduing evils in this state. Exhortation is no longer of any avail, neither is instruction or fear of the law, and of the loss of reputation, since everyone then acts from his nature. And that nature can be restrained and broken only by punishments. But good spirits, although they had done evils in the world, are never punished, because their evils do not return. Moreover, it is granted to know that the evils they did were of a different kind or nature, not being done purposely in opposition to the truth, or from any other badness of heart than that which they received by inheritance from their parents, and that they were born into this by a blind delight when they were in externals, separated from internals. Everyone comes to his own society in which his spirit was in the world. For every man, as regards his spirit, is conjoined to some society, either infernal or heavenly. The evil man to an infernal society, and the good man to a heavenly society. And to that society he is brought after death. The spirit is led to his society gradually, and at length enters it. When an evil spirit is in the state of his interiors, he is turned by degrees towards his own society, and at length, before that state is ended, directly to it. And when that state is ended, he himself casts himself into the hell where those are who are like himself. This act of casting down appears to the sight like one falling headlong with the head downwards and the feet upwards. The cause of this appearance is that the spirit himself is in an inverted order, having loved infernal things and rejected heavenly things. In this second state, some evil spirits enter the hells and come out again by turns. But these do not appear to fall headlong as those do who are fully vastated. Moreover, the society itself in which they were as regards their spirit while in the world is shown to them when they are in the state of their exteriors, that they may thus learn that even while in the life of the body they were in hell, although not in the same state as those who are in hell itself, but in the same state as those who are in the world of spirits. Of this state, as compared with those who are in hell, more will be said in following sections. In this second state, the separation of evil spirits from good spirits takes place. For in the first state they are together, since while a spirit is in his exteriors, he is as he was in the world, thus the evil with the good, and the good with the evil. But it is otherwise when he has been brought into his interiors and left to his own nature or will. The separation of evil spirits from good spirits is effected by various methods. In general, by their being taken about to those societies with which, in their first state, they had communication by means of their good thoughts and affections. Thus to those societies that they had induced to believe by outward appearances that they were not evil. Usually they are led about through a wide circle, and everywhere what they really are is made manifest to good spirits. At the sight of them the good spirits turn away, and at the same time the evil spirits who are being led about turn their faces away from the good, towards that quarter where their infernal society is, into which they are about to come. Other methods of separation, which are many, will not now be mentioned.